great day. If you got your Bibles, grab them and go to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And as you're going there, I have a question for you. How many people have had car issues in the last year? Oh, wow, very vocal this week. Okay, so lots of you have. Okay, you can put your hands down. Car problems stink, I would just say. That's the big point today. Car problems and issues are bad. And we've bought a car for our son Ty back in end of February. And that car has had problems all the time, ever since. 6 weeks, it broke down. They fixed it. They put a Band-Aid on it. 6 weeks later, it broke down. They fixed it. They put a Band-Aid on it, right? And 6 weeks later, broke down again. We had to pay for some of that one. And it has a warranty on it. Okay, automatic 1-year warranty to cover the major things that can go wrong in a vehicle. By the way, 2009 Honda Accord, supposed to run forever. Don't believe it. And so then it's been in the shop again, and now for about a month. And I've been trying to get a hold of them, talk to them, and their dealerships are shady, okay? If you work there, I love you, but these people, they don't get back to me. They don't get back. I don't know what's going on, and they said the engine doesn't work. It needs to replace the engine. I mean, that's pretty bad. The whole engine needs to be replaced. I said, well, is there anything else we can do? Can we trade it in? I mean, you just sold it to us. Can we trade it in to do something else? And no, you got to get the engine replaced, and then you can talk about doing some other things. And so if I get the engine replaced, then maybe I can trade it in for something. If I get the engine replaced, then maybe I can sell it outright myself and try to recoup some of the costs that we've been spending on that. But first, the engine has to be replaced in order to do anything. In our walk through 1 Corinthians, we're seeing different things that the Apostle Paul, through the power of the Spirit of God, is speaking to us concerning the Christian life. But it can only happen in a Christian's life. These changes. Today is another one of those things. We're going to talk about being single. And you can't put the things into practice unless you are a Christian, unless you have a new heart, unless you have a new engine. And so I don't want to lose sight of the gospel message. The gospel message is that you must come to faith in Jesus Christ to be saved. Only then can you hope to implement the things that the Apostle Paul is talking about. Only then can you grow in your faith. You got to have a new heart. You got to be born again. You got to believe in Jesus Christ, that he died on the cross for your sins, that whosoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. You got to believe it for yourself. Your parents' faith won't save you. Your grandparents' faith won't save you. Your neighbor's faith won't save you. Your good works won't save you. Your lack of good works won't save you. What saves you is your personal faith in the Lord Jesus Christ alone for your salvation, that he died for you. He rose from the dead. He's coming again. And if you believe in him, you will not perish, but you'll have everlasting life. And so I wanted to say that straight out, flat out. There's some of you that need to make that today happen. You need to pray. Your soul's at stake. And the only way you can be sure of eternal life is by believing and taking a step of faith. Until you get a new engine, a new heart, you can try all sorts of self-improvement. It's not going to matter at all in light of eternity. You need to come to Jesus. You know, people are coming to Jesus at our church. It's a beautiful thing. People are coming to faith in Jesus Christ. And that's where it starts. And that's what we do here at Village, the 3 Ds of discipleship. Discover Jesus, develop in your faith, and then be deployed in service. Put your spiritual gifts into practice in the church. But it starts by finding Jesus, and then it starts, secondly, by growing in your faith. We're growing in our faith in our study of 1 Corinthians. We're talking about specific real-life issues like marriage, like being single, like being a widow, that Paul's addressing here. And the only way we can hope to put these things into practice in our life is if we start out with a new engine, with a new heart that Jesus gives us by believing in him. In chapter 7, the Apostle Paul has broken down several areas of our everyday life. Verses 1 through 16, he speaks to married people. He also has a little section of widows and widowers, so those whose spouse had died, but he's speaking generally to those who are married or have been married. Then verses 17 through 24, he talks about different earthly statuses that don't really matter. He says, stay where you're at because it doesn't matter if you're a slave or free. It doesn't matter if you're male or female. It doesn't matter if you're circumcised or uncircumcised. Those are earthly categories. What matters is Christ. And so that's what the status that you should be thinking about is. What is your status before the Lord? And then in our text today, verses 25 through 40, he's going to address single people. He's also going to address those who are engaged or betrothed. We'll talk about that in a second. And then also, he's going to mention married people. But he's really speaking in this section to singles, okay? And so if you're single, this is a message for you. If you're married, don't just tune out, because he's going to talk about marriage as he talks about being single. And I want to start out by saying this. Singleness can be a blessing. It can. And the question, if you're single, that you should be asking is, should I stay single? Okay? Should I stay single? I want to show you 3 things in the text that you should consider before getting married or before staying single. You should consider these 3 things. Here's the first one. First, consider the present circumstances. Verse 25, now concerning the betrothed, or virgins, it can be translated, it's singles, I have no command from the Lord, but I give my judgment as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. I think that in view of the present distress, it is good for a person to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be free. Are you free from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned, and if a betrothed woman marries, she has not sinned. Yet those who marry will have worldly troubles, and I would spare you that. This is what I mean, brothers. The appointed time has grown very short. From now on, let those who have wives live as though they had none, and those who mourn as though they were not mourning, and those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing, and those who buy as though they had no goods, and those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it. For the present form of this world is passing away. First, he says, consider the present circumstances. In Corinth, they were experiencing, in this about 51 AD, famines that had rocked the Roman Empire, specifically in this area. We read about this in Acts chapter 11, where there's a prophet named Agabus, and he comes to the church, and he says that there's going to be a great famine. And the great famine comes, and we know it happened under the reign of Emperor Claudius. You read that in Acts. But not only that, we have confirmation of the truth of this from the Jewish historian Josephus. He wrote in his book, The Antiquities of the Jews, about this famine, and he said that Judea specifically was greatly affected. Queen Helena of Adybene, who provided relief, she imported grain into the area. The world was in upheaval during this time in Corinth. And so there were issues with food. It also seems as if the Apostle Paul thought that the return of Jesus Christ was right around the corner. Because at the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, in talking about the return of Christ, he says this, behold, I tell you a mystery, we shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. For the body, the perishable body, must put on the imperishable, and the mortal body must put on immortality. He says we will all be changed. He says Jesus Christ is coming with those who are in heaven already, but we who are here, we're going to be changed. We're going to be given our supernatural body when King Jesus comes. So it seems as if Paul is including himself as the people who will be here when Jesus returns. Now we know that nobody knows the day or time when Jesus is going to return, and neither does Paul, but it seems as if he has this thought in his head. When he gets to the end of his life, he says, I have fought the fight. I've given my life for the faith. What's in store for me is the crown of life. He says that, so he's not thinking that anymore, but earlier on in his ministry, he seems to think that Jesus is going to return. So in light of that, he says, why worry about getting married right now? That's what he's essentially saying. There's famine, there's turmoil, there's persecution, there's the return of Jesus Christ, and that's why he can say things like, and did you notice it when I read it, verse 29? From now on, let those who have wives live as though they had none. Let those who mourn as though they were not mourning. Let those who rejoice as if they were not rejoicing. And those who buy as if they had no goods. And those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with the world. For the present form of this world is passing away. He's saying, in light of all this turmoil, all this stuff that's going on, don't worry about getting married right now. Consider the present circumstances. Now, we must today consider the present circumstances of not only our own world, but also of your own heart. Later on in this text, as he said earlier in chapter 7, he talks about the passions that burn within us. It's the what the blessing of marriage is in sexuality. And so if you're not one that's called to be single, you got to examine your heart and be honest about it. And so singleness is a calling and gift, and is a gift for those who have the self-control, a calling by God to remain single for their life. And if it's not for you, be honest about it. It's not for you, and don't try to remain single and fill the void that you should be filling with a good woman, a good man, in marriage with other things. A year ago, February, in the New York Post, it reports, the headline said, 6 out of 10 young men are single, and here's the disturbing reasons why. New Pew Research Center data has found that nowadays, 63% of men under 30 are electively single, up from 51% in 2019. Just 2019 to 2022, single men category is growing fast. Experts blame erotic alone time online as a major culprit. Here's a quote from psychologist Fred Rabinowitz. Young men are watching a lot of social media. They're watching a lot of porn, and I think they're getting a lot of their needs met without having to go out, psychologist said. I think it's starting to be a habit. The new post-COVID numbers would surely back up the previous research that young men are not looking for a committed relationship, not even looking for casual dates. The decrease is large. But perhaps the largest issue is now, not only with young men, but more so young men, is that they are as a whole more lonely than women. A recent study showed in the 1990s, 55% of men reported to have 6 or more close friends. That percentage dwindled down to 27% in 2021, and now 15% of young men say they don't have one close friend. It's a pandemic of singleness. Singleness is a calling, it's a gift. God gives us marriage as a beautiful thing, a blessed thing, and we're going to see later in this text, if you choose to be married, you're not going to sin. But if you choose to be single, you're not going to sin either. You have to consider your present circumstances, whether you're called to be single or not. Now, the second thing he says here, considering singleness, be aware of the potential challenges of marriage. Look at verse 32. I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife. And his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about worldly things, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. Consider the challenges of marriage. You want less anxiety in your life? Don't get married. I'm glad nobody said amen. That's good. That's good for your spouse sitting next to you. But that's the reality. That's what he says. You don't want more problems, don't get married. More marriage, more problems. Is that the quote? No, more money, more problems. So why does marriage cause these challenges, these problems, these anxieties? Well, it's because you have to be concerned for another person. And if you add kids in the mix, those anxieties tick up and ratchet up. How many of you are concerned right now for a young person in your life, whether a kid or a grandkid? And so it's challenging. You have to be concerned and live with another person who's different than you. And those are anxieties that you're going to have to think about and be concerned about. I am a professional driver, and I don't say that lightly. I've driven for one of the richest men on the planet, $1,000 a day to drive him around, okay? And so I'm a professional driver. I tell my wife that all the time. And yet, when we go driving places, she refuses to stop talking to me about how to drive. I'm a professional driver, and she's saying, there's a stoplight, turn right, there's a stop sign, slow down, you're going off the lane. It's just like, I'm so frustrated. I'd rather drive by myself, take 2 cars wherever we go. I'm just being honest with you today, okay? And so don't pretend like you've never done that. A lot of you were arguing in the car on the way here to church, right? You're talking and arguing, then you see the person at church, you get out in the parking lot, good morning, brother, all good. Yeah, I know. Don't pretend. And so yeah, it's a challenging thing. You gotta care and be concerned for other people. Marriage is challenging. Let me give you 3 big things that why it's challenging, and see if you agree with this, married people. First, you have to provide for the physical needs of your spouse and your family. And I'm going to speak more traditionally here. I'm speaking to the men. You have to provide for your home. 1 Timothy 5, verse 8 says that if you don't provide for your wife and your kids, you're worse than an unbeliever. I thought nothing was worse than an unbeliever. You reject Jesus Christ? Isn't that the worst? No. If you don't take care of your home, if you don't provide for the physical needs of your family, the challenges of marriage is to provide for the physical needs of your home. The second thing is this, to provide for the emotional needs of your spouse or family. That means to love them in such a way that builds them up, to know when to show tough love, to know when to show disciplining love, to know when to show compassionate love and grace-filled love. He's going to go on later on in chapter 13, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things, and doesn't talk when you're trying to drive. Oh, wait, no, that was my own translation. Sorry. But that's hard, to provide the emotional needs of the one that God has given you. And here's the last one, that you'd provide for the spiritual needs of your spouse, of your family. In speaking to the church in Ephesus, the Apostle Paul, talking to husbands and wives, he says this, the husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of the water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. This is providing specifically here for your wife in a spiritual way, in a spiritual manner, as Christ cares for us, his people, as Christ sanctifies us, as Christ helps us as we grow in our faith into who we are in him. In the same way, husbands are supposed to shepherd and love their homes. And I'm so thankful and happy for men in our church who are stepping up and they're assuming that position to care for spiritually for their family. It's a great thing to see, and that's what God calls you to do, and it's a hard thing. It's a challenge. And wives, you get it as well. You're called to shepherd your kids well, your family well, to provide and to respect and honor your husband. And man, it's really hard when he's making jokes about what you say in the car all the time. I see you, Stephanie. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge. Consider these challenges before getting married. And then at the end of verse 39, the end of the chapter, he talks about a wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if the husband dies, she is free to be married to who she wishes, only in the Lord. Yet in my judgment, she is happier if she remains as she is. So considering all the challenges, your spouse dies, you can remarry, but he's saying you're going to have a lot of challenges. Consider those things before getting remarried. We have a family friend, kid's friend, her name's Grace, and she's been talking to us about getting a dog. And we're dog people. We've had our dog, he's gone now, but 16 years we had Bruno, and he was a great dog. But it was a challenge. He needed to go outside a lot. We lived in the country when we first got him. That was easy because he could just be outside all day. Then we moved to town, and he's got to go for walks. And when we go somewhere, we got to get somebody to watch him. And there's hair. He had white hair shedding all over the place. And then especially when he got old, it was harder to take care of him, and he couldn't get up and down the stairs, and so I had to carry him up and down the stairs. I remember in the middle of winter, like the year before he died, carrying him downstairs in the middle of the night, taking him out in the snow, setting him down in the snow so he can do his business, pick him back up, walk back up the stairs, and it was hard. It was difficult. And, the honest answer to get another dog is, you know what? We're good. We're good right now. We loved those days. It was fun, but there's a lot of challenges, and I don't know if we want to invite those challenges back again. Now, wives, I'm not comparing your husband to a dog, but the Apostle Paul says if he dies, you don't need to get another one, okay? And that's just the reality, because there's challenges that are going to happen. So we might foster a dog, right? We might foster a dog and see how, no, she's shaking her head. No, never mind. We're not fostering a dog. So there's challenges to this, and so consider that before you get married. Here's the last thing. Third, remember that marriage is permanent. It is a permanent commitment. Look at verse 36. If anyone thinks that he is not behaving properly toward his betrothed, if his passions are strong, and it has to be, let him do what he wishes. Let them marry. It is no sin. But whoever is firmly established in his heart, being under no necessity, but having his desire under control, and has determined this in his heart to keep her as his betrothed, he will do well. So then he who marries his betrothed does well, and he who refrains from marriage will do even better. A wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives. But if her husband dies, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. Yet in my judgment, she is happier if she remains as she is, and I think that I too have the Spirit of God. Now, verse 36 is an interesting verse. He's talking about one that is betrothed. Betrothed is got some similarities to our engagement of today, but it's very different at the same time. Betrothal was not merely an engagement to be pledged to one another. It was a formal, legally binding agreement that marked the couple as husband and wife, even though they did not live together yet, and they were not consummating the relationship, meaning they were sexually pure. They weren't involved with one another in that way. They were virgins. That's why the word can also be translated virgins. The groom would present a ketubah, a written document outlining the responsibilities that he has toward his wife, including provisions for her financial well-being in case of his death. The groom often paid a price called mohar to the bride's family, acknowledging her value and compensating her family for the loss that they would receive by giving away their daughter. The betrothal was formalized in the presence of witnesses, often involving the giving of a ring. That's similar today when you get down on one knee, propose to that special person. They also gave rings. After betrothal, a period of up to 1 year typically followed. During the time, the man would prepare the home, and then at the end of that time, the allotted amount of time, they would come together, have a marriage ceremony that would last a feast for days. At the end of the time, they would be man and wife, officially consummate the marriage, live together till death do them part. Marriage is a lifelong commitment. Matter of fact, at the end of this chapter right here, we read that death is the only way out of your marriage. That's what it's supposed to be. I don't care what our culture tells you. Death is the only way out. I love Billy Graham, evangelist. His wife, Ruth Graham, was asked, have you ever considered divorce? She's like, divorce? No. Murder? Yes. And so, remember, it's a lifelong commitment. And so, you've got to decide. Verse 36 is interesting because it seems as if Paul is talking to the father of a virgin, or the father of one who was engaged, betrothed to another man. And he says this, if his passions, meaning the young man who's betrothed to his daughter, if his passions are strong, and it has to be, let them do as he wishes. Let them marry. It is no sin. So, it's okay if they want to get married, even though, consider the present circumstances, the distressing times, the famines that are coming. Jesus is returning next week. But if they want to get married, it's not a sin. It's a personal decision, ultimately, neither of which is a sin. Singleness is a gift. It's a calling. Few people have it. Marriage is a blessing. God designed us to be not alone, but with one another, to encourage one another to be fruitful and multiply. One of the best things you can do, young men, young women, is get married to another believer who loves Jesus Christ and make lots of babies who are going to follow and love Jesus Christ. That's a great thing, beautiful thing. Love that. But remember that it's permanent. So since it's permanent, let me give you 3 things if you're thinking about getting married, okay? Number 1, first you got to decide if you want to be married. This is the first point of the sermon. Decide, okay, am I marriage material or am I called to be single? Second thing is this: be careful who you get serious with. Okay? Be careful who you get serious with. Because you're going to be with somebody for the rest of your life, and you don't want to be giving yourself away, becoming one flesh with multiple other people before you get to the person that you're supposed to be with. So be careful who you're with. Be careful who you give your heart to. Guard your heart. Third thing is this: do it God's way. All of it. The dating, the purity, the living arrangements, do it God's way. The marriage, you get to do it only once. Do it God's way. Singleness can be a great gift and calling, but most people don't have it. Here's the application. If you're single and it's your calling, run for God as hard as you can, because you've been given a gift. You don't have to have anxieties about another person or a family. You can be concerned about the Lord and His work, and you can go like the Apostle Paul. Apostle Paul was probably married. His wife probably died, and now he was just going all out for the kingdom of Christ. You can do that same thing as a single person. Give all that you can. Here's the second thing, though. If you're single, but you don't want to be, that's not your calling. Here's 3 things for you, okay? Number 1, pursue the Lord right where you're at. Pursue the Lord. Grow spiritually. Pursue God right where you're at, in your singleness right now. Trusting in God that as you pursue Him, He's going to take care of you. Number 2, pray for God's direction. And a mate, pray. Talk to Him about your heart. Share with Him your feelings. He knows them anyway. He's just waiting for you to communicate with Him. Pursue the Lord. Pray to the Lord. Ask Him to open the doors, to lead you to the right person. And then the third thing, put yourself out there. Put yourself out there with other godly Christian people. We have a group that meets at our Sugar Grove campus every weekend, singles group, young people who are seeking Christ, seeking to live in this life for the Lord. Get to know other Christian people. Put down your phone, get off your computer, and go be with real people. Pursue a relationship. Put yourself out there. God help us as we, no matter what area of our life that we find ourselves in, that we would be trusting in Him and His timing, that His ways are best.